G'day Bomber fans, a lot of news over the weekend. We obviously had our win, but it came at a cost. Zach Reed did his hammy, Matt Guelphy did his calf. The hot conditions were obviously not kind to the muscles, and speaking of not kind, Mason Redman, naughty boy, he wasn't very kind to Jai Newcombe. He's been offered a one-match suspension for striking. That's what I'm going to talk about today, because I think the AFL has made it very confusing for fans to understand the decisions or the MRO puts forward. I think it's very silly, personally. Contradictions everywhere you look, but today I'm going to explain why Redman was suspended and why the club didn't challenge. Decisions I think are both accurate and acceptable, but I will also talk about the controversy that stems from a near-identical incident that resulted in a fine just a week before. So let's get into it. Alrighty, so I'm going to show you Mason Redman's strike on Jai Newcombe. We've seen it before, but hopefully I don't get this taken down, because the reason I don't show footage on this channel is because I've had a string of videos I worked hard on taken down for some reason when I show just a tiny bit of footage. So hopefully this is different. So on screen is the Redman incident. I'm going to go over the MRO's grading system in a bit to show you why it's a bit of a no-brainer. I'll do the same for George Hewitt, don't worry. But here you see Redman away from the ball, back to the ball, I believe, have a bit of argy-bargy with Nuke. He gives him a big shove that slips and collects him in the jaw or face. It should be noted that Redman wasn't trying, or it wasn't clear that Redman was trying to hit him that high in the face. If you slow it down, you can see the first contact is made with his shoulder. But the intent to hit a certain body part doesn't really downgrade the decision itself that much. I'll talk about that in a second. I think an extreme example is Andrew Gaff and Andy Brayshaw. I personally think Gaff was trying to hit the upper body area of Brayshaw, but he just happened to duck down or drop his body a little bit at the time, and it resulted in a big punch to the mouth. That's just my personal take on it. But the AFL doesn't look at the actual intended target there, because the end result is a punch to the face, or in Redman's case, a strike to the face. So the MRO grading, as you can see, really has two things to worry about. The first dictates the actual suspension itself, whether or not the act was careless or intentional, because if a strike to the face is ruled intentional, the minimum penalty is a suspension, no matter the severity. Whereas if it's graded careless, you can get away with a fine. In this case, it's pretty obviously intentional. His back is turned away from the ball. They are nowhere near play. He strikes Newcombe, and yes, it might not have been his intention to hit him exactly there, but he still does hit him there. It's the strike itself that is intentional. If it remained an upper body strike and it didn't slide up to get him in the face, it would be a fine. But unfortunately, he collects him quite clearly in the face. To me, it's black and white. It's a suspension. He intends to strike him. He does strike him, and there is no disputing that. That is why the club didn't waste their time in appealing the decision, because they don't really have an argument to do so. Sure, you can look at past incidents, but once the decision is made, there is no overturning it, I think. You can't argue that the strike motion isn't intentional. The only argument that could really be made is whether the severity is low or medium, but the AFL said it was low, so we're not going to try and argue a higher suspension. They graded it as low, which is why it's a 1 week ban. I think it's the description the AFL gives with this, well, pretty much every suspension really, that makes things murky. I would love the MRO to actually come out and properly explain the decisions made, because right now the fan base is looking at this and comparing it to a previous incident and rightfully saying what's the difference. And to be honest, I got to agree. I think Mason Redman should get a week suspension, but I also think George Hewitt deserves one as well for his strike on Lachie Neale last week, which I'm sure you all know about, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. It's up on screen. The main reason why George Hewitt is not suspended is because they graded this contact as careless instead of intentional, which is, I think it's genuinely ridiculous. The reason it is careless, or it's supposedly careless, is because it is in a stoppage. They are both jostling for position near the ball, and the elbow or strike is seen as potentially a fend or a push away. That is what Laura Kane, the general manager of the AFL, came out and said. Now, obviously, that's wild. It is bull. It is quite clearly intentional. That isn't the act of a player jostling for position. That is quite simply a guy trying to hurt another guy. That should be a suspension, because if it was, it would set the tone for the comp, and we wouldn't be talking about Redman's suspension and the confusing elements to the MRO. But they gave Hewitt a fine, said it was careless instead of intentional. It was a mistake. It pretty much means if the ball is near you, you can hit someone and get away with it. That's the simple truth. But that is why you can't simply show the two clips side by side and mount an argument there to get Mason off the hook, because the reason why Hewitt's was downgraded is because the ball was near it. That is supposedly a footy act, and it's wrong, it is wrong, but that is why you can't compare the two clips. It's silly, but it would be even sillier to suggest Redman's was a football act because he wasn't even facing the ball. He was nowhere near it. And the annoying thing is, it just isn't fair for the comp. I'm not going to complain too much because in the end, it is one guy getting let off the hook when he shouldn't. But right now, you have the MRO cracking down on Redman, fairly, I should add, the week after they decided a near-identical incident was okay. Redman shouldn't be let off the hook because of a mistake made prior. That's my opinion. Redman should stay suspended, and he will, obviously. The AFL aren't going to come out and say, actually, no, we'll let him have his game against Sydney. By the law, it is black and white, but it does just sting a little bit knowing a big rival of ours got away with one. Not saying it's biased or anything. I don't really think that happens much in this comp, but it does sting. I hope I made that clear because I've seen quite a few people complain. There's been a lot of chatter about this, including chatter from experts and commentators, saying that you can just compare the footage and get Mason Redman off the hook, but unfortunately it just isn't that simple. It's the correct decision, Mason Redman's suspension, but it comes a week after a wrong decision was made, and there is nothing that can really be done about that. That is all. Quick little video. I'll have my preview out tomorrow. I might also do an injury list video on Friday, maybe. We'll see. Cheers for watching. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and as always, go Bombers.